This week it's time for us to finish up the controls on our old pickup truck, which would include installing the gas pedal, the throttle cable, and the kickdown cable or TV cable that goes to our transmission. Step one was locating where the throttle pedal is most comfortable for us, and you need to keep in mind what it's going to be like while you're driving and relaxed, and wide open throttle or partial throttle, where you spend most of your time. Now that we've got that handled, it's time to take apart this throttle cable assembly and start our fitting. Now these tend to be what they call universal. You just want to make sure that you buy one that has a long enough internal cable and then of course a long enough sleeve that will always need to be cut down some. And on this one it looks like once we feed it through the firewall we're probably going to cut some of these threads off also, because we need more room for that throttle linkage assembly or the top portion of that gas pedal to be able to go tighter against the firewall. And this kind of length will keep it so far away that I'm afraid it's going to cause issues with the geometry. Next thing I want to do after disassembling the cable is to knock this C-clip out and go ahead and install it in the top portion of our throttle assembly. That way we're not trying to do this tedious work in that floorboard. Now we feed this cable through the hole that we drilled and kind of just set this up temporary. But as you can see, if this was too long, the throttle pedal and this linkage would have really odd angles in order to make this all work. Probably a good time to point out, when it comes to running throttle cable assemblies, you always start at the pedal and work your way out. Right now I'm going to feed the housing down this cable and we'll get our first look of how much room there is on the other side of the firewall. So you can kind of see what we were talking about on how much thread there is coming through. That full rest would make contact about here, which is awful high to hold your foot up. We can make that adjustment, but I'm afraid we're just going to run out of throw if we have this much room sticking out between wide open throttle and idle. So what that tells me is we're going to want to cut as much off of this as we can. So we're going to thread this nut against here and leave enough room for what would be the firewall there and its thickness, and then we can cut everything else off. Pro tip, always cut a bolt or any threads with the nut already on it, so when you remove the nut it'll clean the threads up on the way off. I've got it snugged in place where it's going to be in the firewall. Now it's time to run it to where it will be connected to the throttle body, and typically, like, this is a stock location. We could trim this off and it would lay about like this and then hook to the throttle blades. But now this cable detracts from looking at this intake, which, to be honest, is pretty expensive and kind of what we want to be as the focal point. Now form over function tells us reroute this thing, but if you're going strictly for good function, this is probably your best route because you don't have any sharp angles on this sleeve that would create excessive wear by the cable going in and out. But me, I really want the look to be on purpose as long as it's not detrimental to the function. So if we feed it in here, that's not a terrible angle, and neither is this side, and then it can tie up just like that. Now, none of these angles are really extreme. It's hidden away under the intake, looks clean on both sides, and we still have the proper approach for the throttle blade. Now to set where, I think this is called the ferrule, is supposed to be, you can thread it on to your cable, and you want to remember, well, we've already got this set, by the way, and we could cut some of this off. We can also move this cable some, but for now, we're just going to leave it like it is. What's important to remember is pull all the slack out of this cable, and that'll bring that throttle pedal all the way up against the firewall. And whenever you get to the point where you think it needs to be, you can cinch that down. But remember, wherever you put it, it can't get any longer, because you're going to need to cut this excess cable off in order to install it into the throttle assembly. Now that the throttle pedal is all situated, it's time to run this kickdown cable that showed up from Summit. And I could have sworn I ordered one with the black sleeve. As a matter of fact, I know one of the images had the black sleeve. And just because it says stainless steel in the part number, that could still mean that the actual cable itself is stainless, but the sleeve is not necessarily braided stainless. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But out of fairness, we have a stainless braided dipstick tube for the transmission, so I think we should just send it. So this is the stock TV cable that came on the 700R4 when we bought it, and it would probably work fine with a regular LS intake and throttle body, but as you can tell with this Holley high ram, it's definitely too short. And the one we ordered comes extra long, and then we can, of course, cut it where we need it to fit, which is really nice, and then we'll thread the cable back in. We can get rid of a bunch of this hardware, and basically it just snaps into place where this stud is already here on our throttle body. So what we're going to be looking for when we get under the truck, I'll go ahead and feed this wire out. It's a little hook that comes up out of the transmission where this connects, and it'll go through this little eyelet on the end, and so we'll have to thread it around. But before we get too excited, we'll be underneath there and make sure that with the O-rings that are included in this kit installed, that it does fit nice and snug in our transmission so we don't have any leaks. Because I did read a couple of reviews where they said it didn't fit very well and it leaked. Then other reviews that said it worked excellent. So I guess we'll see what we get. Well, this would have been way easier before I put this exhaust in the way. Live and learn, I guess. So this is the factory 8mm bolt. Get that out of here. Pull this housing up. So while we're here, like I said, we're gonna, that didn't look good at all. Whatever this seal was, I'm wondering if that thing didn't leak. That's a terrible looking situation. Anyway, here's our other one. And see how snug this fit is. Oh yeah, that's going to be real nice. So while we're here, we'll leave that in place, and then we can go up top and mark this housing for the length that we need to cut it. So LS style engines weren't designed to have TV cables like what we're running on this 700R4 connected to them. So even though like the bracket that Holley sells with this has both of these next to each other, that's not where our transmission kickdown cable is going to go, because it needs to be pulled in order to activate it, whereas the throttle cable does the pulling and shortens that distance. So not going to work for a TV cable. Lucky for us, we had this bracket left over from a job we did on a 4th gen Trans Am. That's going to work out nicely for us to bolt that onto this throttle body like so, and then we can hook our TV cable down lower to the bottom of this throttle body lever, So whenever it opens the throttle, it'll actually lengthen the distance between it and the mount so we can get our adjustment set. Once you assess where all the hardware is going to sit in here, you can cut the excess cable housing off so you'll have a nice clean install. You always want to use like electrical tape on the side of the measurement that you're going to cut. That way, when you're finished cutting, the tape is still holding that braid from fraying. I'll make sure and blow that out because there's a pretty good chance that some of that debris made it inside this nylon tube. This is the hardware that Summit sends with this kit, and this is supposed to be the hold down bracket, I would be sure, because this bolt is going to go into the transmission like we removed that other one. This bracket would need to drop down over this tube. That's not going to do us any good at all. I guess I'll send a text to the Summit tech line and see if they actually make a hold down that fits this 700 R4 TV cable. And they said they're going to send us out a new bracket. What are the chances they send another bracket just like this that doesn't fit? Anyway, I'm impatient, and you guys are too, because you want to see this completed. So I'm going to take this bracket and I'm going to cut this loop off of it and just sort of leave like a fork like you'd see on a hold down on a distributor. These two are just 4 thousandths or 40 thousandths apart from each other in diameter. So they're close enough in size. I can use this as sort of a template of where to cut this so we can get underneath there and just pin this in place, which is all it needs to be done. Hey buddy, come on up. Don't be scared. Hey there. As long as this connection, as fragile as it seems, stays inside this little tube, it can't back out far enough to come off the cable. I'm going to go test it before I bolt it down. Yep. Still had spring back, so I know we're still connected. Now, for our custom hold down bracket. Now when I go to put this together, I don't mind so much to just leave that tape on there. It kind of makes things nice and snug. And it doesn't show, so that makes it fine. Drop this in place. We're going to not want to have much of the inner section exposed because of the sharp angle that we're going to be potentially dealing with. That could actually probably do with being rotated up a little bit just so this doesn't get in a bind as it activates. We'll take a look at some of that stuff and we can make adjustments later. Good news is we'll be able to fasten this TV cable down here on the fuel rail mounts. And that'll kind of keep it completely out of sight to where all you'll see is this amount of the braided line. And this throttle body had this fitting originally here, so I've moved it to this lower position. And once we get this stuff fastened, I think that's going to work out just right for our cable. And I did go ahead and bend this back at a bit of an angle, so it's not going to be rubbing and wearing out the inside of that tube when we're activating or actuating the throttle. So we're going to slide this in place. It should, there we go. Find its little notch. Now this is the ferrule. That'll keep it in place. I'm going to go ahead and move that back a little bit. That'll allow a little room for some fine adjustment on this cable. So you almost need 3 arms. You want to have the throttle all the way in its open position at the same time that you're pulling the max amount of cable out on the transmission, and then snug that down. The go one?
The go?
Yeah, the gas pedal.
Right now?
Yeah, all the way down.
Okay, all the way down.
Okay.
Let go?
No, keep it pinned. All right?
Let go?
Mm-hmm. Go again. Ooh. Okay. One more. Okay. All right, thanks, sis. My lovely assistant. Now that we've got that handled, we can go ahead and tighten this down and keep it in place. Now, you can fasten this cable in here as we discussed. Last item on our list is this transmission dipstick tube. Now, I don't want to leave it all the way up here because you got to be able to pull it out, and you need to have room to put your funnel in there to add fluid. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit. Also, don't necessarily want to trim any off of it because honestly, it's a huge pain in the butt. So we're going to hope that that right there looks pretty good. And we'll level that up and get that thing mounted. Good, there we go. Do the same thing on this one.
Turn it?
No. I can do it from there, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to chalk this up as a win, you know, and I probably will go ahead and put a blanket and some protective stuff around here just so I don't have to disassemble this whole thing, and just cut this bracket off right here because really it's not ever going to need anything on the outside of that throttle linkage. I know this just wasn't a wow episode for you guys, but I mean, it's releasing on Christmas Eve and I've got stuff to do too, but these are necessary things that have to be done or the truck won't go. So I appreciate you guys watching. Hope you have a great Christmas.